Close your eyes for a second. 65 men, one wooden ship, 3 weeks at sea. No toilet, no drain, no soap, no privacy. Just salt spray, wet wool, and the smell of men who've been rowing since dawn. Every surface is damp. Every breath carries sweat and brine. The deck is barely wider than a pickup truck. And these men eat, sleep, bleed, and relieve themselves within arm's reach of each other for weeks on end. By every law of medicine, this ship should be a coffin. Cholera, dysentery, typhus, pick your poison. One contaminated hand, one shared water barrel, and the whole crew goes down within days. But here's what actually happened. They didn't get sick. Not in any numbers that mattered. These men reached Iceland. They colonized Greenland. They touched North America 5 centuries before Columbus. And the real surprise, it's not what they did on the ship. It's what happened when you compare them to the most advanced civilization in medieval Europe. One that had toilets, surgeons, and sanitation laws, and still lost millions. The 12th century, the age of the Crusades. Thousands of European soldiers packed into transport ships bound for the Holy Land. These were the largest naval operations medieval Europe had ever mounted. Enclosed decks, minimal ventilation, shared water drawn from wooden barrels stored in the dark. Below those decks, dysentery and typhus spread faster than any Saracen army ever could. Men who'd survived siege warfare and open battle never made it to shore. Disease claimed them below deck before they ever saw the enemy. During the Third Crusade, disease losses aboard ships exceeded battlefield casualties, and this problem was never truly solved. 800 years later, the HMS Thunderer, a fully equipped Royal Navy warship with surgeons, sanitation regulations, and purpose-built toilets, lost 43 men to cholera in 2 weeks. Now rewind further. Go back to the 9th century. Picture the Hedeby longship, 30 meters long, 2.7 meters wide. That's roughly 2 men per meter of deck space. 60 oarsmen working in shifts, sleeping between rowing benches, eating cold provisions while North Sea spray soaked through their cloaks. No surgeon, no sick berth, no regulations, no toilets, no waste chutes, nothing. When storms hit, there was no going below deck. There was no deck below. Hands wet with sweat and seawater gripped the same oars minutes apart. Food passed from fingers that hadn't seen fresh water in days. Men huddled together for warmth, breathing the same damp air in a space tighter than a modern prison cell. If you've ever been on a small vessel in rough weather, you know what confinement does to a crew. You know how fast things go wrong when basic sanitation fails. Anyone who's served on a ship, military or commercial, understands this arithmetic. Tight quarters, shared surfaces, limited water. You've seen what happens when one person gets sick. It moves through a crew like fire through dry timber. And yet, year after year, decade after decade, Viking fleets launched, raided, traded, and came home. No mass outbreaks, no fleet-killing epidemics. Operational capability maintained across 3 centuries of maritime dominance. Medieval fleets with enclosed decks and formal infrastructure bred disease. Viking longships with no infrastructure at all didn't. Same ocean, same bacteria, completely different outcomes. So, what did the Vikings know that medieval Europe never figured out? Before we get into the system, let's deal with the myth. Hollywood gave us an image. Filthy, blood-spattered raiders, matted hair, rotten teeth, men who looked like they hadn't bathed since birth. The archaeological record tells a completely different story. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, an Arab diplomat who encountered Norse traders on the Volga River, around 921 AD, documented something that clearly surprised him. These Northmen washed every single day, in shared bowls of water passed from man to man. 3 centuries later, the English chronicler John of Wallingford recorded his own complaint about Viking settlers in England. They combed their hair daily. They bathed every Saturday. They changed their clothes regularly. His grievance had nothing to do with violence or raiding. He was upset because Viking hygiene was making them attractive to English women. The greatest threat the Norse posed to England, according to at least one medieval chronicler, wasn't their axes, it was their grooming standards, and the graves confirm it. Across Scandinavia, Britain, and Iceland, Viking burial sites consistently contain the same personal items: bone combs, often ornately carved, tweezers, small ear spoons made from antler, complete grooming kits buried alongside weapons and tools, as though personal hygiene held the same importance as readiness for battle. These weren't the burial goods of barbarians. These were the possessions of people who considered cleanliness a matter of identity. Now the question becomes sharper. How did a civilization this committed to hygiene manage to uphold those standards on vessels with absolutely zero sanitation infrastructure? The answer isn't one solution, it's a system, and every layer was more deliberate than it appears. Start with the ship itself. Archaeologists have excavated Viking vessels for over a century. The Oseberg ship, 834 AD. The Gokstad, 890 AD. The Skuldelev fleet, discovered in Roskilde Fjord. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped ships still buried underground. And across every excavation, every scan, every catalogued artifact, the same absence. No chamber pots, no latrines, no designated waste areas, nothing. As we explored in our first video, Viking shipbuilders made ruthless design choices. Every element served speed, flexibility, or survival. Anything that didn't earn its place was left on shore. Sanitation infrastructure fell into that category. Not because the Norse were indifferent to waste, but because the ship's design already solved the problem. Here's the principle. A long ship's freeboard, the distance from the waterline to the deck's edge, was roughly half a meter. Stand at the bow, hold the stem post, and the ocean is right there. You could trail your fingers in it without leaning. Human waste went straight overboard, immediately. Nothing accumulated, nothing festered. Moving saltwater diluted pathogens within seconds. In calm weather, it was effortless. In rough seas, simple wooden buckets served as temporary containers, emptied at the first safe moment. Never stored, never allowed to sit. But here's the detail that separates this from a crude workaround. The hull itself was part of the sanitation system. Clinker-built planks, overlapping, riveted, sealed with tarred animal hair, were never perfectly watertight. Seawater seeped in constantly. Crews bailed the bilge daily as routine. Any organic debris, food scraps, spillage, accidental contamination mixed with that seawater and went overboard within hours. No stagnant pools, no anaerobic pockets where bacteria thrive, a constant natural flush. Now compare that to a medieval crusader transport, enclosed cargo holds, deep bilges sealed below deck, inaccessible except through hatches, waste accumulating in standing water for weeks. Those bilges became toxic cesspools. Bilge fever, essentially sepsis from decomposing organic material in stagnant seawater, devastated crews well into the 19th century. Viking ship, open, leaking, continuously flushed by the ocean. Medieval ship, sealed, stagnant, and lethal. And then there was the drinking water. Fresh water stored in wooden barrels turns deadly within weeks. Bacteria multiply in the dark. E. coli breeds in the grain of the wood. Later navies learned to fear the water barrel as much as enemy cannon. As we covered in our first video, Vikings carried weak beer, accidentally pasteurized through the brewing process, and fermented sour milk instead of fresh water. Both lasted longer and happened to suppress the bacteria that made stored water lethal. They chose taste. They got survival. There's a genuine debate among historians about how much of this was intentional. Some argue the Norse understood, through generations of observation, that certain provisions kept crews healthier. Others say it was pure practical coincidence. They simply preferred beer to water. The evidence can support both readings. Where do you land on this? The ship was only half the equation. Viking crews didn't stay at sea indefinitely. Over 200 documented harbor sites have been identified from Norway to Newfoundland, a network of reset points roughly a day's sailing apart. Every beaching was a sanitation reset. Men went ashore. Waste dispersed into soil. Clothes were scrubbed in streams. Bodies were washed with sand and cold water. The biological burden of shipboard life simply vanished into the landscape. But the real genius wasn't in the harbors. It was in what the Norse did with their time on land. And this is where the gap between Viking and medieval Europe becomes a gulf. The word laugardagar, washing day, is the Old Norse root of Saturday in modern Scandinavian languages. Every seventh day, without exception, Vikings bathed. Not as a luxury, as a cultural obligation. In winter, this meant heating scarce firewood. During voyages, it meant cold seawater, scrubbing at the first landfall. The schedule held, regardless. Daily combing was equally non-negotiable. Those ornate bone combs found in graves weren't vanity items, they were medical tools. The bacterium that causes epidemic typhus spreads through lice feces entering scratched skin. Medieval armies routinely lost more soldiers to typhus than to combat. Daily combing physically removed adult lice before they could lay eggs. Weekly bathing disrupted the parasite's entire reproductive cycle. What comes next is the part of this story that rarely gets told. The difference between Viking hygiene and medieval European hygiene wasn't about knowledge or technology. It was about something far more powerful. If this kind of depth is what you come here for, a like genuinely helps us keep going. The Coppergate excavation in York, the old Viking settlement of Jorvik, uncovered something remarkable between 1976 and 1981. Viking-era homes had pit latrines, simple holes in the ground with wooden seating platforms, screened by partitions. Basic, yes, but functional. Waste was contained, disposal was deliberate. But the most famous piece of evidence from Viking York isn't a comb or a latrine. It's something far less dignified, the Lloyd's Bank coprolite. Found in 1972 near Coppergate, 20 centimeters long, a fossilized piece of 9th century Viking waste, now one of the most famous archaeological specimens in Britain. Analysis revealed intestinal parasite eggs, proof that Vikings were not immune to infection, but they managed it, contained it, kept it from cascading into epidemic. Now picture yourself walking through medieval London or Paris during the same centuries. Chamber pots emptied from upper windows into the street below. People shouted warnings before dumping. Watch out for the water, and pedestrians learned to listen. Open sewers ran alongside market stalls. Butchers dumped waste into the same streams that supplied drinking water downstream. Lice infested nobles and peasants alike. Kings scratched. And here's what made the difference existential. Medieval Europe believed bathing was dangerous. Not a minority view, mainstream medical opinion. The theory held that warm water opened the pores, allowing disease to enter the body. People were actively discouraged from washing. Same century, same continent in some cases. The Norse are bathing every Saturday by cultural mandate. Medieval Europeans are avoiding water because their physicians told them it would kill them. The Viking hygiene system didn't depend on a single innovation. It worked because every element reinforced every other element, and the enforcement mechanism was the most elegant part of all. No laws, no inspectors, no bureaucracy, just shame. On a longship carrying 65 men, reputation was survival currency. Showing up unwashed, unkempt, crawling with lice, that wasn't a private failing. It was a threat to every man aboard. Social pressure enforced compliance more effectively than any regulation ever could. Each crew member became a node in a distributed defense network. One man's discipline protected the group. One man's neglect endangered everyone. If you've ever served in a unit where personal standards were enforced by the men around you, not by regulation, but by expectation, you recognize exactly how this works. You know that peer accountability is stronger than any written rule. Medieval Europe took the opposite approach. Hygiene was a matter of individual choice, when it was considered at all. Cities grew faster than sanitation systems could follow. Waste management was a municipal problem that no municipality solved, and the consequences arrived in 1347, the Black Death. The plague bacterium, carried by fleas, hosted by rats, thrived in exactly the conditions medieval cities had spent centuries building. Open sewers, contaminated wells, streets shared by humans and livestock, dense populations with no systematic hygiene culture to slow transmission. Between 1347 and 1353, the plague killed an estimated 50 million people. Somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Entire villages disappeared. Labor markets collapsed. Social structures that had stood for centuries fractured in months. The medieval world didn't lack intelligence. They weren't fools. Edward III ordered London streets cleaned. Italian city-states invented quarantine, holding ships offshore for 40 days before allowing crews to disembark. These were genuine, thoughtful responses to a crisis they didn't fully understand. But they were reactive. Emergency measures applied after catastrophe struck. The Norse system was preventive, woven into the fabric of daily life so deeply that it required no emergency response. The combing happened before the lice spread. The bathing happened before the infection took hold. The waste went overboard before it could accumulate. Two civilizations faced the same biological enemies, the same parasites, the same bacteria, the same transmission pathways. One embedded hygiene into culture. The other left it to chance. The results speak across 1,000 years of history. Picture a Viking harbor camp at dawn. A fire is burning. Steam rises from a wooden basin. A man kneels beside it, cups water in his hands, and presses it against his face. He draws a bone comb through his beard with the slow precision of someone performing a task he's done 10,000 times. A linen cloth wipes his forearms. Fresh wool garments replace the salt-stiffened ones from the voyage. Ibn Fadlan watched this ritual on the banks of the Volga and recorded every detail. He described men passing a shared bowl of water from one to the next, washing face, hands, and hair before passing it on. Each man used the same water. By modern epidemiological standards, that shared bowl was a remarkably efficient way to spread surface bacteria. The intent was cleanliness. The execution, by today's knowledge, actually facilitated some transmission, and that's worth sitting with. The Vikings had no germ theory. They couldn't explain why their system worked, but generations of observation, encoded into ritual, produced a public health system that outperformed civilizations with libraries and royal physicians. Sometimes the deepest knowledge isn't written in books. It's carried in habits passed from one generation to the next. If you've ever inherited a practical skill from a parent or grandparent, something they couldn't fully explain but knew worked, you understand exactly how this kind of knowledge travels. I'd be curious to hear those stories in the comments. Step back from the details for a moment. Two worlds, same era, same parasites, same mortal stakes. One built a culture where hygiene was identity, where a man's comb was buried alongside his sword, where 65 men on an open boat enforced each other's discipline through shared understanding, not written rules. The other built cathedrals and universities and legal codes and left hygiene to individual preference. And when the plague came, it found a continent perfectly prepared to receive it. The difference was never technology. It was systems thinking. Design prevented problems before they started. Social norms guided behavior without bureaucracy. And the natural world, the ocean, the coastline, the soil, became part of the solution. That's not primitive. That's a civilization that understood survival is a culture, not a technology. If what brings you here is the real story, how these people actually lived, what they valued, and why their daily habits solved problems that defeated entire empires, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe, and you'll see what comes next. The next time you wash your hands without thinking about it, consider this. 1,000 years ago, a man knelt by a wooden basin and did the same thing. He couldn't explain why it mattered. He just knew it kept his crew alive. That knowledge, quiet, habitual, carried in the hands, outlasted every empire that forgot it.